Numbers were changed. Clauses were invented. A translator smiled as if nothing were wrong. Elena heard it all while serving wine in the shadows of the obsidian room. When she whispered to the ruthless Mafia Boss, her words shattered the deadly fraud and exposed a secret buried for years. Julian Moretti did not flinch. He did not gasp. He did not even blink. The 32-year-old boss of the Moretti syndicate merely paused his breathing for a fraction of a second. A heavy, oppressive silence descended over the sprawling mahogany table as he slowly lifted his right hand. He tapped his index finger exactly once against the polished wood. That single quiet sound echoed like a sniper shot in the tense, suffocating atmosphere of the private dining room. Before Silas Reed could register the shift in the air, his obsequious, professional smile faded into a mask of pure, unfiltered terror. Two towering bodyguards clad in immaculate black suits materialized from the shadowed corners of the room. They lunged across the space with terrifying, unnatural speed. One slammed a massive hand onto the back of the translator's neck while the other swept his legs out from under him. Silas crashed face first onto the floor. The sickening thud of bone hitting hardwood reverberated through the obsidian room. Crystal wine glasses vibrated violently. A silver fork clattered against a pristine porcelain plate. The quiet, meticulously curated luxury of the exclusive restaurant shattered into a million jagged pieces. Across the table, Dmitry Volkov froze. The 50-year-old Russian oligarch and brought the kingpin instinctively reached for the concealed weapon nestled inside his tailored jacket. His own heavily armed guards tensed, instantly ready to draw fire and turn the room into a slaughterhouse. But Julian raised a single calm hand, keeping his dark, bottomless eyes fixed firmly on the man pinned to the floor. Volkov hesitated. He recognized the cold, calculating wrath of the Moretti patriarch. This was not an ambush against the Russians. This was an internal execution of justice. Silas shrieked. The sound was a pathetic, high-pitched whine that clawed desperately at the silk-lined walls. He gasped for air as the bodyguard pressed a heavy, brutal knee directly into his lower spine. The traitor pleaded in a chaotic mixture of broken English and fluent Russian, begging for mercy. He swore there had been a terrible misunderstanding. He cried out that the legal terminology was overly complex and that the territorial clauses shifting power away from the Moretti family were merely suggestions meant for later review. Julian completely ignored the pathetic cries. He did not grant the traitor the dignity of a single glance. Instead, his voice cut through the chaos like a jagged blade carved from ice. Lock down the entire VIP wing. Nobody enters. Nobody leaves. The heavy carved oak doors clicked shut immediately. The reinforced deadbolts engaged with a final terrifying snap. The panicked, urgent whispers of the restaurant manager hovering outside were abruptly silenced. The opulent room transformed into a sealed vault. The rich scent of spilled Cabernet Sauvignon mixed with the sharp metallic tang of impending violence. Only then did Julian turn his head. His razor-sharp gaze locked onto Elena. She stood absolutely frozen near the silver wine cooler. Her heart battered against her ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape a cage. She clutched the serving tray so tightly her knuckles turned completely white and her fingers cramped. For the past 6 months, she had trained herself to be nothing more than a ghost. A 26-year-old woman crushed by astronomical debt, drowning in despair, and hiding from the ghost of a brilliantly ruined career. She was supposed to be just a waitress. A nameless shadow meant to pour drinks, clear plates, and disappear into the wallpaper. But now the devil himself was looking directly at her. Julian's eyes were a dark obsidian brown, completely devoid of warmth or mercy. They were the eyes of an apex predator assessing a sudden, unexpected anomaly in his closely guarded territory. He scanned her slowly from head to toe. He took in the cheap black polyester uniform, the frayed edges of her apron, the strands of dark hair escaping her tight professional bun, and finally the defiant, terrified intelligence shining brightly in her wide eyes. "The negotiations are temporarily suspended," Julian announced, smoothly addressing Volkov without breaking his intense eye contact with Elena. "My sincere apologies, Dmitry. It appears we have a rat rotting in the foundation of my house. We will resume our business once the pest control is fully complete." Volkov gave a slow, rigid nod of agreement, his own cold gaze shifting between the Mafia Boss and the trembling waitress. He signaled his men to stand down and holster their weapons. "Drag him to the basement," Julian ordered his men softly. The bodyguards hauled Silas up by his ruined collar, dragging his thrashing, weeping body toward the concealed service exit. The translator's desperate screams faded into a muffled, distant echo as the heavy, reinforced steel door swung shut behind them, leaving behind his suffocating, heavy stillness. Julian slowly rose from his tufted leather chair. He buttoned his bespoke suit jacket with deliberate, measured, calculated movements. Every single step he took toward Elena seemed to consume all the remaining oxygen in the room. He towered over her, radiating a terrifying aura of absolute dominance and dark, undeniable power. Elena took a hesitant step back, but her spine immediately hit the cool, solid wall. There was nowhere left to run. Her breath caught in her throat. "Stay exactly where you are," Julian commanded, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. He stopped mere inches from her trembling frame. The proximity was completely paralyzing. She could smell his expensive bergamot cologne mixed with the primal, intoxicating scent of danger. He loomed over her, trapping her effectively in his shadow. He reached out and pressed one large, calloused hand flat against the wall right beside her head, caging her in. A waitress who completely understands the intricate complexities of Bratva territorial law and international syndicate jurisdiction, Julian mused, his tone a dangerous velvet purr that sent a shiver down her spine. "You are not pouring another glass of wine tonight. You are going to stand right here and tell me exactly how you know what you know. And if you attempt to lie to me, your fate will be significantly worse than his." Julian stepped back just enough to allow oxygen to reach her lungs, but the suffocating weight of his imposing presence remained completely unbroken. "Move," he commanded, lifting a single finger to point down the dim hallway toward the frosted glass doors of the manager's private office. Elena did not dare to argue. Her legs felt incredibly heavy, as if poured from solid lead, but she forced herself to walk. She kept her chin high and her shoulders pulled back, despite the cold terror aggressively clawing at the base of her throat. The opulent restaurant was entirely silent now. The Moretti syndicate had effectively evacuated all patrons and civilian staff, leaving behind an eerie void that amplified the sound of her cheap flat shoes hitting the polished marble floor. The manager's office was small, cramped, and smelled faintly of stale espresso and nervous sweat. Julian bypassed the plush leather guest chairs and casually leaned his tall frame against the edge of the heavy mahogany desk. He reached inside his immaculate tailored jacket, slowly withdrew a sleek black semi-automatic handgun, and placed it deliberately onto the polished wooden surface. The sharp metallic clack of the weapon hitting the desk made Elena physically jump. "I asked you a direct question, Elena," Julian said, his voice dropping into a dangerously soft register that vibrated through the small room. "How does a waitress working at the Obsidian Room understand the intricate, lethal complexities of a Bratva territorial dispute? You have exactly 1 minute to convince me that you are not an undercover asset planted by a rival syndicate." Elena stared at the cold steel of the weapon and then forced her gaze upward to meet the merciless obsidian eyes of the Mafia King. The absolute crushing desperation of her daily reality suddenly eclipsed her immediate fear of death. She had nothing left to lose. "I am not a spy," she stated, her voice trembling slightly at first, but gaining remarkable strength with every syllable. "I am a certified polyglot and a former high-level corporate interpreter. I am fluent in Russian, Mandarin, Italian, French, German, Spanish, and Arabic. I understand legal loopholes because I spent years drafting them for international conglomerates." Julian tilted his head, his sharp jawline catching the dim overhead light. His expression remained entirely unreadable. "A genius linguist serving $50 steaks to criminals. That makes absolutely no logical sense. What went wrong in your perfect life?" "Everything," Elena replied, the bitter taste of betrayal flooding her mouth. "My former business partner Marcus Thorne took everything. He used my secure credentials to forge international contracts and embezzle millions of dollars from dangerous clients. He vanished into thin air, leaving me to take the catastrophic fall. My professional license was permanently revoked. The endless legal fees completely drowned me. And just when I thought I had hit the absolute bottom, my mother was diagnosed with a terminal illness. The aggressive debt collectors seized my home, my savings, and my reputation. The only place in this entire city that would hire a disgraced translator without running an extensive background check was a restaurant that needed an invisible shadow to pour expensive wine for powerful men. Julian remained perfectly still, studying her pale face with intense, calculated scrutiny. He was searching for the slightest micro-expression of deceit, the smallest hesitation in her breathing. He found absolutely none. He saw only raw, unfiltered pain and a stubborn, fierce will to survive that refused to be extinguished. She had stood in a room packed with armed, ruthless killers and boldly exposed a deadly financial trap. She had done it not out of foolish heroism, but out of pure calculating desperation. She was brilliant, utterly broken, and entirely cornered. She was the perfect asset for a man who rolled through absolute control. He picked up the gun from the desk and smoothly holstered it, moving slowly toward her once again. "You possess a very rare and dangerous talent, Elena. But talent is completely useless without the power to protect it. Silas Reed is bleeding out in my basement right now because he allowed rival greed to compromise his sworn loyalty. I require a translator who fully understands the lethal gravity of the words spoken in the shadows. I need someone who cannot possibly be bought by my enemies because she already owes me her entire life." Elena held her breath as he stopped right in front of her. The heat radiating from his large body offered a strange, terrifying warmth. "I am offering you a binding contract," Julian stated, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her dizzy. "I will clear every single cent of your massive debt by tomorrow morning. I will personally arrange for your mother to be transferred to the most exclusive private medical facility in the country, equipped with the best specialists money can buy. She will lack for nothing." "What is the cost?" she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet room. She knew perfectly well that a deal with the devil always demanded a soul in return. "You," Julian replied softly. He slowly raised a large, calloused hand to lightly brush a stray strand of dark hair away from her pale cheek. The gesture was shockingly gentle, of violent contrast to the lethal nature of the man standing before her. "Your voice, your mind, and your absolute, unwavering loyalty. You will take off that pathetic apron and leave this miserable life behind tonight. You will step into the dark with me. You will translate my syndicate wars and negotiate my underworld peace. From this exact second forward, your safety, your talents, and your future belong exclusively to the Moretti family. Refuse and you walk out of this door, going straight back to your crushing debt and your dying mother. Accept my terms and you will never have to fear anyone in this city ever again. Make your choice." Elena looked at the ruthless billionaire who commanded criminal empires with a single nod. She thought of her mother's fragile, labored breathing in the dingy public hospital ward. She thought of the crippling anxiety that woke her up every single night. Then she looked deep into Julian's eyes and found a terrifyingly solid sanctuary. "I accept," she said. Elena reached behind her back and untied the frayed strings of her uniform. The cheap polyester apron fell to the polished marble floor with a quiet rustle. It was the physical shedding of a miserable past. Julian watched her for a brief moment before turning his broad back and walking out of the manager's office. Two massive men in tailored suits stepped forward, immediately guiding Elena out of the service exit and into the cold night air, where a sleek, armored black car sat idling against the curb. The drive through the dark streets of New York was a silent blur. Elena leaned her tired head against the tinted glass, watching the neon lights bleed into the shadows. The men did not speak to her, and she did not ask where they were going. She had surrendered her autonomy the moment she accepted Julian's terms. They arrived at a towering skyscraper made of steel and glass. The private elevator whisked her up to a sprawling penthouse that smelled of expensive leather and fresh lilies. Inside, a team of silent, efficient women was already waiting. They ushered Elena into a massive dressing room filled with garments that cost more than she had earned in an entire lifetime. For the next 2 hours, they scrubbed away the smell of cheap restaurant grease and exhaustion. They styled her dark hair into sleek, cascading waves that framed her pale, striking face. When they finally stepped back, Elena stared at the full-length mirror and barely recognized the woman reflecting back at her. Gone was the invisible waitress. In her place stood a woman draped in a sharply tailored emerald green suit that hugged her curves with lethal elegance. The fabric felt like liquid silk against her skin. A delicate gold chain rested against her collarbone, and sharp stiletto heels gave her a commanding height. It was armor disguised as high fashion. She took a deep breath, feeling a strange surge of dormant power awaken in her veins. A bodyguard escorted her out of the penthouse and into the adjacent wing of the building, which served as the heavily fortified nerve center of the Moretti syndicate. The transition from the luxurious apartment to the underground tactical room was jarring. The air here was thick with cigarette smoke, the smell of black coffee, and the palpable tension of organized crime. Julian sat at the head of a massive tactical table surrounded by 5 of his highest-ranking lieutenants. He looked up as the heavy doors opened. For a split second, the ruthless Mafia King paused. His dark eyes swept over Alina's transformation, absorbing the sharp emerald suit and the defiant tilt of her chin. The grumpy, hardened lines of his face softened for an imperceptible moment before immediately hardening back into an intimidating scowl. "You are late," Moretti grumbled, checking his heavy silver watch. "In this world, time is measured in blood. Sit down." Alina did not flinch at his harsh tone. She recognized it for what it was: a shield. She walked confidently across the room, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete floor, and took the empty chair positioned directly to his right. The lieutenants glared at her with open hostility. They were hardened criminals covered in tattoos and scars who did not trust outsiders, especially a beautiful woman who had just appeared out of nowhere. "We do not have time to babysit a civilian boss," grunted a heavily scarred man sitting across from her. "This is syndicate business." Julian silenced the man with a single freezing look. Then he slid a small black digital audio recorder across the table toward Alina. "Prove to my men why you are breathing my air," Julian commanded, his voice flat and challenging. "Our surveillance network intercepted this encrypted audio transmission from a rival cartel operating out of the southern docks. My best analysts have spent 3 hours trying to decipher it. The language is a bastardized mix of Sicilian dialect, street slang, and coded numeric references. Translated. Now." Alina picked up the device. The lieutenants smirked, exchanging skeptical glances. They fully expected her to fail and crumble under the immense pressure. Alina pressed play. The audio was terrible, filled with background static and the harsh guttural voices of 2 men speaking rapidly. She closed her eyes, tuning out the hostile stares of the men surrounding her. She let the chaotic sounds wash over her mind, breaking down the aggressive syntax and isolating the linguistic roots. The room remained dead silent as she listened to the 2-minute recording twice. Then she opened her eyes and placed the device back onto the metal table. "It is not a drug shipment," Alina stated, her voice clear and completely unwavering. "The men are using an old Sicilian fisherman dialect to mask their true intent, but they are mixing it with modern architectural codes. When they refer to the rotten catch, they are talking about weapons, specifically untraceable automatic rifles." The scarred lieutenant leaned forward, his sneer deepening. "And the numbers. What about the sequence?" they repeated. "They are not coordinates," Alina replied, meeting his aggressive stare with absolute calm. "They are dates and vault numbers. They are planning to raid your secure armory located beneath the old meat packing district tomorrow night at exactly 2 in the morning. They mentioned that the back door has already been unlocked by an inside man." The smug expressions on the lieutenants' faces vanished instantly. The room plunged into a chilling, absolute silence. They all turned their heads to look at Julian. The Mafia Boss sat back in his leather chair, a dangerous, satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He knew the armory in the meatpacking district was one of their most guarded secrets. Only someone who completely understood the layered complexity of the rival gang's underworld vocabulary could have extracted that precise information. The scarred man swallowed hard, his hostile demeanor evaporating. He slowly lowered his head in a silent, grudging nod of deep respect. The other men followed suit, looking at Alina not as an outsider, but as a highly valuable lethal asset. Julian stood up, his imposing figure dominating the tactical room. "Secure the armory and hunt down the inside man," he ordered his lieutenants. As the men scrambled to execute his orders, Julian turned to look down at Alina. The dark storm in his eyes had settled into something resembling pride. "You passed the test, little bird," he murmured softly enough that only she could hear. "Welcome to the family." 3 agonizing hours passed inside the underground tactical room. Elena remained perfectly still in the heavy leather chair while the Moretti syndicate waged a silent, violent war above ground. She watched Julian orchestrate the defense of the meat-packing district armory with terrifying cold efficiency. He barked sharp, calculated commands into encrypted cell phones, moving his lethal pawns across the dark chessboard of the city. Every order he gave proved that her translation had been flawlessly accurate. The rival strike force had walked directly into a heavily armed ambush. As the digital clocks on the concrete walls shifted to 4 in the morning, the heavy steel doors of the tactical room swung open. The scarred lieutenant walked in. He looked completely exhausted, his knuckles bruised and his expensive shirt stained with dark, terrifying spots of crimson. He carried a thick manila folder and a digital tablet, dropping them both onto the metal table right in front of Julian. The air in the room suddenly smelled of damp concrete and fresh copper. The rat finally broke the scarred man, reported, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. Silas spilled every single detail before his heart gave out in the basement. He was not acting alone. Julian leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table and steepling his fingers. "Tell me exactly who bought the loyalty of my translator." "The Corsicans," the lieutenant answered, spitting the name out like poison. "They have been quietly funneling millions in dark money through offshore accounts, trying to build a war chest large enough to challenge our territory. They wanted you to sign that rigged contract with Volkov tonight so the Bratva would legally wipe us out on their behalf. But Silas was just a pawn. He did not possess the intellectual capacity to draft those complex lethal clauses on his own. The Corsicans hired an external financial broker to design the legal trap and launder their bribe money." Julian narrowed his dark eyes. "Give me a name." "We extracted the broker's identity from the secure server Silas used to communicate," the lieutenant said, tapping the screen of the digital tablet. "He is a ghost in the corporate world, specializing in fraudulent international contracts and untraceable shell corporations. His name is Marcus Thorne." The name dropped into the quiet room like a live grenade. Elena stopped breathing. The perfectly constructed armor of her emerald green suit shattered into a million invisible pieces. The harsh fluorescent lights above her suddenly flickered, and the solid concrete walls of the tactical room began to violently spin. Marcus Thorne. The name was a venomous curse that had haunted her every waking nightmare for the past 2 agonizing years. It was the name of the man who had stolen her secure credentials, forged her signature on illegal documents, and walked away with millions while leaving her to face the catastrophic fallout. Marcus was the architect of her crushing poverty, the reason her mother lay dying in a sterile, underfunded public hospital ward, and the monster who had forced her into the humiliating shadows of the obsidian room. A high-pitched ringing sound erupted in her ears, drowning out the low voices of the mafia lieutenants. Elena gripped the edge of the metal table so tightly her manicured nails dug into her own palms, drawing tiny drops of blood. Her chest heaved frantically as she desperately fought for air that simply refused to enter her lungs. The sheer psychological terror of her past was suddenly standing right in front of her, threatening to drag her back down into the suffocating dark abyss she had just barely escaped. She squeezed her eyes shut, trembling uncontrollably. She was having a massive, severe panic attack right in the middle of the most dangerous room in New York. "Out," Julian commanded. His voice was not loud, but it carried a lethal absolute authority that tolerated zero hesitation. The ringing in Elena's ears slightly muffled the sound of chairs scraping violently against the concrete floor. Within 5 seconds, the heavy steel doors clicked shut. The lieutenants were gone. Elena felt the suffocating darkness closing in around her throat. She tried to stand up to run away, to hide in a corner, but her legs completely gave out beneath her. Before she could hit the cold floor, a pair of strong, unyielding arms caught her. Julian did not offer her sweet, gentle words of comfort. He did not stroke her hair or tell her that everything was going to be perfectly fine. He knew that soft lies were completely useless to a woman drowning in a sea of raw trauma. Instead, he used his massive, imposing physical presence to forcefully anchor her back to reality. He grabbed her shoulders with a firm, bruising grip and hauled her up until her face was inches from his own. "Look at me," Julian ordered, his tone a harsh, gravelly command that cut straight through the fog of her panic. "Open your eyes, Elena. Look right at me." She gasped, her eyelids fluttering open. Her terrified tear-filled gaze locked onto his dark, merciless obsidian eyes. "He ruined me," she whispered, her voice cracking under the crushing weight of her unbearable history. "He destroyed my life. He is the reason my mother is dying. He is going to finish killing me. He is a dead man walking," Julian stated with absolute chilling conviction. His large hands tightened slightly on her shoulders, transferring his own dark, formidable strength directly into her trembling bones. "You are no longer a vulnerable civilian crying over stolen money. You are standing inside my fortress. You belong to the Moretti family now." Julian leaned in closer until his sharp bergamot scent completely overpowered the stale air of the room. "I protect what is mine, Elena. No one in this entire world is allowed to touch my people and live to brag about it. The Corsicans think they have purchased a brilliant financial architect. They have actually just bought themselves a one-way ticket to hell." Elena stared at the ruthless king of the underworld. The paralyzing ice in her veins slowly began to melt, replaced by a terrifying, unfamiliar heat. "I am not going to just kill Marcus Thorne for you," Julian promised, his voice dropping to a low, dark, possessive rumble that vibrated against her chest. "I am going to hunt him down, trap him in a corner, and hand you the blade. I will give you the absolute right to skin him yourself. We are going to burn his entire world to the ground together. Are you ready to play my game, little bird?" Elena looked at the dangerous monster holding her and realized he was handing her the ultimate weapon. She slowly stopped shaking. She took a deep, steadying breath and gave a single determined nod. Elena stepped back from the terrifying comfort of Julian's solid chest. She wiped a single rogue tear from her cheek and squared her shoulders. The crushing weight of her panic had evaporated, completely replaced by a cold, burning clarity. She did not ask to be escorted to a bedroom to rest. She did not ask for a sedative or a glass of water. Instead, she turned her attention directly to the metal tactical table where the scarred lieutenant had dropped the encrypted tablets and the thick manila folders containing the Corsican financial records. Julian watched her with a silent, intense fascination. The fragile, broken girl who had just collapsed in his arms was gone. In her place stood a lethal, focused strategist. He gestured for his guards to remain outside the heavy steel doors, effectively sealing the two of them inside the underground bunker. He walked over to the table and spread the classified documents out under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Show me how he builds his traps," Julian commanded softly, pulling a chair out for her. Elena sat down and immediately went to work. She discarded her tailored emerald green suit jacket, draping it over the back of the heavy leather chair. For the next 5 hours, the underground command center transformed into a quiet, intense war room. The digital clocks on the concrete walls shifted slowly from 4 in the morning to 9, but neither of them noticed the passage of time. Elena sifted through thousands of pages of encrypted bank statements, offshore routing protocols, and fake corporate registries. She translated convoluted French legal jargon and deciphered Italian banking codes with a terrifying, relentless speed. Julian did not pace the room or issue barked orders over his secure phone. He stayed anchored right beside her. He leaned over the table, his broad shoulders brushing against hers as he followed the intricate web of deception she was unraveling. He quickly realized that Elena was not merely a human dictionary. Her mind operated like a sophisticated supercomputer capable of seeing invisible connections in a sea of chaotic data. Where he saw a list of dummy corporations, she saw a highly deliberate pattern of embezzlement. "Marcus is arrogant," Elena explained, her voice steady and completely devoid of fear. "He believes he is the smartest person in any room. He uses the exact same foundational architecture for every illicit contract he drafts. He creates 3 layers of shell companies in jurisdictions with strict bank secrecy laws. But he always leaves a hidden backdoor in the tertiary company, a small obscure clause that allows him to siphon a percentage of the total transaction into a blind trust completely untraceable by his own clients." She pointed a slender finger at a complex spreadsheet detailing the Corsican war chest. "They think they are paying him a flat consulting fee to launder their money and legally trap you, Julian. But Marcus is skimming an additional 12% off the top of their weapon procurement funds. He is stealing directly from the Corsican syndicate right under their noses." A slow, dark, predatory smile spread across Julian's face. His dark eyes glinted with the dangerous thrill of a perfectly executed checkmate. The Corsicans are notoriously unstable and entirely unforgiving. If they discover their brilliant architect is quietly robbing their vaults, they will not just fire him. They will mount his head on a spike. Exactly, Elena agreed, looking up to meet his intense gaze. We do not need to assassinate Marcus. We just need to hand the Corsicans the undeniable proof of his betrayal. They will execute him for us. Julian leaned closer, resting his hands flat on the table framing her workspace. The physical proximity was overwhelming, but it no longer terrified her. The sharp scent of his bergamot cologne blended with the smell of strong black coffee and old paper. The grumpy, ruthless mafia king who trusted absolutely no one was staring at her with profound, unmasked admiration. He recognized that her sharp intellect was the perfect, flawless counterpart to his brutal physical power. He was the heavy artillery, but she was the laser-guided targeting system. There is an exclusive underground gala hosted by the High Council of the Five Families in exactly 2 days, Julian murmured, his voice a low, hypnotic rumble. The Corsican leadership will be in attendance. Marcus Thorne will also be there, acting as their protected guest of honor to finalize the massive dark money transfer. It is a neutral zone where violence is strictly prohibited. It is the perfect stage for a bloodless slaughter. I need to be there, Elena stated firmly, refusing to back down. I need to be the one who translates the live transfer protocols. I need to look him dead in the eyes when I rip his entire empire apart. Julian studied her fiercely determined expression. He knew the immense psychological risk of placing her in the same room as her abuser, but he also understood that she needed this specific victory to completely heal her shattered soul. He reached out and gently tucked a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. His touch was incredibly gentle, a stark, jarring contrast to the violent nature of the revenge they were currently plotting. You will be by my side the entire night, Julian promised, his voice vibrating with absolute protective, possessive authority. You will wear my colors and stand under my direct protection. No one in that ballroom will dare to even breathe in your direction without my explicit permission. You will be the bait, the judge, and the executioner, little bird. And I will be your impenetrable shield. Elena looked at the dangerous man standing beside her. The morning sun was undoubtedly rising above the city streets, but down here in the dark, fortified bunker, she felt a strange, profound sense of belonging. The legitimate corporate world had chewed her up and violently spit her out. The laws of polite society had utterly failed to protect her. But behind the terrifying exterior of this ruthless mafia boss, she had found an absolute, unyielding safety. She was no longer a victim hiding in the shadows. She was the architect of her own devastating justice, preparing to burn her past to the ground. The grand ballroom of the highly classified estate, hidden deep within the sprawling woods of upstate New York, radiated a lethal, deceptive elegance. The High Council Gala was an exclusive gathering of monsters dressed in bespoke tuxedos and draped in stolen diamonds. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cigars, imported perfumes, and the metallic undertone of concealed weapons. Julian stepped out of the armored limousine, offering his large, calloused hand. Elena took it without a single shred of hesitation. She wore a breathtaking floor-length gown of midnight black silk that cascaded around her like liquid shadows, perfectly hugging every curve of her body. A singular, flawless blood-red ruby rested against her collarbone, a clear, undisputed declaration of her exclusive allegiance to the Moretti family. As they walked through the towering gilded doors, the low hum of dangerous conversations abruptly ceased. The power dynamic of the entire room shifted the moment Julian Moretti crossed the threshold. The string quartet playing softly in the corner seemed to fade into absolute nothingness. Tonight, the predatory gazes of the rival syndicate bosses did not linger solely on the ruthless king of the underworld. They locked immediately onto the stunning unknown woman holding his arm with effortless, commanding grace. Elena kept her chin high and her spine perfectly straight. She was no longer the trembling, invisible waitress from the obsidian room. She was a dark queen stepping onto a deadly battlefield, fully aware of her own terrifying power. Across the sea of crystal chandeliers and heavy velvet drapery stood the Corsican delegation. Right in the center of the hostile group, casually holding a crystal flute of expensive champagne, was Marcus Thorne. He wore a perfectly tailored ivory suit, projecting the arrogant, sickening confidence of a man who firmly believed he held the entire criminal underworld in the palm of his hand. He was laughing at a joke made by a Corsican lieutenant when his eyes casually swept toward the grand entrance and completely froze. The smug, arrogant smile vanished entirely from his handsome face. The champagne flute in his trembling hand tilted dangerously close to spilling over the pristine cuff of his expensive shirt. Marcus stared at Elena, his mind violently rejecting the impossible reality unfolding right in front of him. The fragile woman he had systematically destroyed, the disgraced, naive translator he had deliberately left to rot in crippling, insurmountable debt, was currently standing at the right hand of the most feared mafia boss on the eastern seaboard. Elena met his shocked, terrified gaze across the massive, crowded ballroom. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She offered him a slow, chilling smile that promised absolute total ruin. Julian leaned close, his warm breath brushing the sensitive shell of her ear. "The trap is completely set, little bird," he whispered, a dark, heavy, protective promise vibrating in his chest. "Go hunt. I will not let you out of my sight for a single second." Elena gave a slight nod and smoothly detached herself from his solid side. Even as she walked away, the heavy, invisible presence of the elite Moretti bodyguards tracked her every single movement, forming an impenetrable, silent shield around her. She glided gracefully through the opulent crowd, blending seamlessly into the background while remaining entirely unforgettable. She accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter and positioned herself strategically near the towering floral arrangements decorating the central pillars. The gala was a chaotic breeding ground for illicit negotiations conducted in hushed, multilingual whispers. Elena closed her eyes for a brief second, allowing the chaotic symphony of global languages to wash over her highly trained mind. She drifted near a group of heavily armed men speaking rapid, aggressive Sicilian. She picked up the exact shipment coordinates for a massive weapons cache intended for the Corsican front lines. She moved toward the velvet-lined VIP lounges, tuning her ears to the sharp guttural German of a European arms dealer who was bitterly complaining about the inflated laundering fees Marcus had secretly tacked onto their accounts. Every single complaint, every whispered grievance, was perfectly catalogued in her flawless memory. She slowly circled back toward the Corsican enclave, keeping herself completely obscured by the shadows of the marble columns. Marcus had barely recovered from his initial paralyzing shock and was currently desperately trying to finalize a lucrative side deal with a prominent French cartel boss. He spoke in rapid, fluent French, completely unaware that the deadly brilliant woman standing only 10 paces away understood every single syllable perfectly. Elena listened intently as Marcus promised the French boss a highly classified access code to a dummy corporation located in the Cayman Islands. He rattled off the complex 12-digit alphanumeric sequence meant to bypass the strict Corsican security protocols. He was actively selling out his current dangerous employers right in the middle of their own protected gala. Elena committed the specific code to memory. She mentally recorded the exact exorbitant percentages Marcus was skimming and the names of the corrupt offshore bankers facilitating the blatant theft. Every arrogant word he spoke was another heavy iron nail hammered deeply into his own coffin. She had successfully gathered the final irrefutable pieces of evidence required to execute the nuclear revenge they had meticulously planned in the underground bunker. She turned around and walked straight back through the crowd toward Julian, who was watching her with fierce, burning pride. The intelligence was gathered. The stage was perfectly set. It was time to close the jaws of the trap. Julian stepped exactly 3 paces away to accept a mandatory ceremonial greeting from an elderly patriarch of a neutral Chicago family. It was a required gesture of underworld respect, but Julian's dark obsidian eyes never actually strayed from Elena. He kept her firmly within his line of sight, maintaining a silent, unbroken vigil. However, Marcus Thorne, driven by the blinding, reckless desperation of a man who felt his carefully constructed empire trembling, saw that minuscule physical distance as a fleeting opening. He abandoned his conversation with the French cartel boss and moved swiftly through the crowded ballroom toward Elena. Marcus stopped right beside her, holding a fresh crystal glass of champagne. His handsome face was twisted into a cruel, ugly sneer that stripped away his polished, sophisticated veneer. "You really think wearing an expensive silk gown changes who you actually are, Elena?" he hissed, his voice a venomous, toxic whisper meant only for her ears. You are still that pathetic, terrified little translator I left drowning in the gutter. You are a waitress playing dress-up with a monster. If you think Moretti actually cares about you, you are completely delusional. The moment he gets bored, he will throw you right back to the wolves. Walk out of this estate right now, or I swear I will make sure the ruthless debt collectors finalize the foreclosure on your dying mother's hospital bed tomorrow morning." A few months ago, those cruel, calculated words would have shattered her completely. They would have sent her spiraling into a debilitating panic attack. But Elena did not even blink. She slowly turned to face the man who had stolen her past. She looked at his perfectly styled hair, his expensive ivory suit, and the subtle, desperate tremor in his hands. She did not feel fear anymore. She felt an overwhelming, chilling sense of absolute power. She allowed a slow, freezing smile to curve her lips. It was a terrifying, predatory expression she had learned directly from the ruthless mafia king who owned her loyalty. Marcus frowned, entirely unnerved by her complete lack of terror. "What are you smiling at, you stupid girl?" he spat. "I am smiling because you have absolutely no idea who is standing directly behind you," Elena replied, her voice completely calm and perfectly steady. Marcus instinctively stiffened, but before he could turn around, Elena raised her voice just enough to cut through the ambient noise of the nearby guests. She intentionally projected her words toward the Velvet VIP lounge, where the French cartel boss and a high-ranking Corsican lieutenant were currently enjoying their imported cigars. She did not speak in English. She switched flawlessly into aristocratic Parisian French. Her pronunciation was razor-sharp, cutting through the air like a silver blade. Monsieur Laurent, Elena projected her clear voice, commanding immediate attention. "I believe your brilliant financial architect forgot to mention a highly critical detail regarding your new Cayman Islands accounts. Specifically, the tertiary backdoor he hard-coded into the routing protocol, which allows him unrestricted access to your offshore funds. The access code is a 12-digit alphanumeric sequence starting with your daughter's birth year." The French cartel boss froze his cigar, stopping halfway to his mouth. His cold eyes darted from Elena to the suddenly pale, sweating face of Marcus Thorne. Marcus panicked. "Shut up," he hissed, stepping forward and reaching out with a trembling hand to aggressively grab Elena's shoulder and silence her. "You do not know what you are talking about." Before his desperate fingers could even graze the dark silk of her gown, the ambient temperature in the grand ballroom seemed to drop to freezing. A massive, suffocating wave of dark, lethal energy washed over them. Julian Moretti materialized directly behind Elena like a physical manifestation of death itself. He did not yell. He did not draw a weapon. He merely placed one large, incredibly possessive hand on Elena's waist, anchoring her against his solid chest, while fixing Marcus with a stare so completely devoid of mercy it made the air turn to ice. "Touch her," Julian warned, his voice a low, demonic rumble that vibrated through the floorboards, "and I will sever your hand from your wrist and make you eat it." Marcus violently recoiled, stumbling backward as if he had been physically struck. His crystal champagne flute slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering into dozens of sharp, glittering pieces against the polished marble floor. Julian did not intervene further. He stood like an immovable mountain of dark power, offering Elena absolute, unconditional protection, while simultaneously giving her the complete freedom to execute her vengeance. "Keep speaking, my beautiful queen," Julian murmured softly, his warm breath brushing the crown of her head. "Burn him to the ground." Elena turned her piercing gaze back to Marcus and effortlessly shifted her language to rapid, aggressive Sicilian dialect, targeting the Corsican lieutenant, who had now stepped out of the lounge, his hand resting suspiciously close to his concealed holster. And to the honorable Corsican delegation, Elena continued, her voice ringing with undeniable authority. "You believe you are paying a flat consulting fee for his laundering services. But if you audit the secondary ledger hidden under his dummy corporation, you will find a highly illegal 12% skimming fee attached to every single weapon procurement transaction. He is not protecting your war chest. He is actively bleeding you dry to build his own untouchable retirement fund." The Corsican lieutenant's face contorted into a mask of pure homicidal fury. He glared at Marcus with eyes that promised a slow, agonizing execution. The French boss, Monsieur Laurent, slowly set his cigar down and took a deliberate, menacing step away from the financial broker, effectively isolating Marcus in the absolute center of the room. Marcus looked wildly around the grand ballroom. The luxurious elite crowd had suddenly transformed into a circle of hungry, violent wolves. His own lucrative partners were looking at him with lethal, murderous intent. He opened his mouth to stammer a desperate, pathetic defense, but no words came out. He had built his entire illicit empire on a foundation of lies and complex linguistic manipulation, and now the brilliant translator he had cast aside had just used those exact same weapons to completely annihilate him. The trap was perfectly sprung, and there was absolutely nowhere left to hide. Marcus stood paralyzed in the center of the grand ballroom. The luxurious space had suddenly become a terrifying execution block. He opened his mouth to deny the accusations, but the crushing silence of the surrounding syndicate bosses swallowed his pathetic excuses entirely. Julian Moretti did not need to raise a weapon to initiate the slaughter. He merely gave a subtle nod to his lead bodyguard standing perfectly still near the heavy velvet curtains. The bodyguard stepped forward and handed a sleek encrypted tablet directly to the high-ranking Corsican lieutenant. The screen glowed with the meticulous, devastating dossiers Elena had compiled in the underground bunker. It contained every forged signature, every hidden offshore routing number, and the exact mathematical breakdown of the 12% Marcus had been quietly siphoning from the Corsican war chest. The lieutenant scrolled through the translated documents. With every second that passed, his face grew paler and his jaw clenched tighter. The irrefutable proof of the ultimate betrayal was laid bare in flawless legal terminology. He did not yell. In the highest echelons of the criminal underworld, true rage was always entirely silent. He simply handed the tablet to Monsieur Laurent, who took one brief look at the compromised Cayman Islands access codes and nodded in grim absolute understanding. "We brought you into our house," the Corsican lieutenant stated, his heavy accent thick with lethal intent. "We gave you a seat at our table, and you decided to steal the silver. You are no longer under our protection, Marcus Thorne. Your contracts are null and void. Your life is completely forfeit." The finality of the statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. The invisible, impenetrable shield of his arrogant wealth evaporated in a single terrifying second. He was no longer a brilliant, untouchable financial broker. He was a dead man breathing borrowed air. The Corsican guards moved simultaneously, forming a tight, inescapable perimeter around him. Panic ripped through his chest. Marcus fell to his knees on the polished marble floor, ruining the pristine fabric of his ivory suit. He did not look at the Corsican lieutenant. He did not look at the French cartel boss. He certainly did not look at Julian Moretti, who stood radiating absolute dark power. He looked directly up at Elena. "Elena, please," he begged, his voice cracking, completely stripped of its former arrogant venom. "You know me. We built a company together. I made a terrible mistake, but I can fix it. I have millions hidden in secure Swiss accounts. I can give it all to you. You can pay for your mother's treatments for the rest of her life. You do not belong with these monsters. You are a good person. Please tell them to let me go." Elena looked down at the pathetic, weeping man kneeling at her feet. She searched her heart for any lingering trace of the naive, terrified girl who had once trusted him. She found absolutely nothing. He was desperately trying to use her morality as a weapon, just like he had used her professional credentials years ago. But she was no longer a victim trapped in a nightmare. She was the architect of his demise, standing proudly in the protective shadow of a king. Julian rested his heavy, warm hand on the bare skin of her shoulder. He did not intervene. He had promised her the blade, and he was honoring his vow by letting her deliver the final fatal strike. "Tell him his sentence," Julian murmured, his dark voice carrying effortlessly across the silent ballroom. Elena stepped out of Julian's immediate shadow, her midnight black silk gown brushing softly against the floor. She looked down at Marcus with a stare so cold it froze the desperate tears on his face. She did not raise her voice. She spoke with the chilling, terrifying precision of a judge delivering an irreversible verdict. "There is absolutely no money left in your Swiss accounts," Marcus. Elena stated, her tone perfectly flat. "Every single dollar you stole has already been systematically drained and rerouted by the Moretti syndicate. Your dummy corporations have been legally dissolved. The extravagant penthouse you bought with my stolen reputation was seized by our private banks 3 hours ago. You pushed me into the dark expecting me to die there. But you forgot one crucial detail. I learned to see perfectly in the dark. Marcus let out a hollow, devastated gasp. He realized with absolute horrifying clarity that she had not just exposed him to the cartels. She had completely financially annihilated him. "Translate the final terms for our Corsican friends," Julian instructed, leaning casually against a marble pillar while projecting an aura of absolute, undisputed dominance. "Tell them the Moretti family claims his stolen assets as adequate compensation for the insult against my house. The Corsicans may claim his flesh." Elena did not hesitate. She turned her striking face toward the Corsican lieutenant and translated Julian's brutal decree into flawless, commanding Italian. The lieutenant gave a sharp, rigid bow of agreement, accepting the terrifying terms of the bloodless execution. "Please," Marcus screamed, dropping his head to the floor near her stiletto heels. "I beg you." Elena did not step back. She simply looked down at him, feeling the final heavy chains of her past shatter completely. "You are nothing but a bad translation, Marcus," she whispered softly, dropping the words directly onto his trembling shoulders. "And I am finally correcting the error." The Corsican guards descended upon him instantly. They dragged Marcus Thorne across the grand ballroom by the collar of his ruined suit. His desperate, frantic screams echoed off the crystal chandeliers, growing fainter and fainter as he was pulled into the suffocating darkness outside the gilded doors. He was dragged away into the violent, unforgiving night, stripped of his wealth, his power, and his dignity, exactly as he had once done to her. The heavy mahogany doors closed with a solid final thud. The immediate threat was completely eradicated. The luxurious ballroom remained entirely silent for a moment before Julian stepped forward and offered Elena his arm. She took it, her heart beating with a steady, triumphant rhythm. The ghosts of her painful past were dead. The nuclear revenge was flawlessly complete, and she had never felt more powerful. 2 days after the underground gala, the atmosphere inside the highest floors of the Moretti Tower was crisp and meticulously controlled. The sprawling boardroom overlooked the massive concrete grid of New York City, bathing the space in sharp morning sunlight. The Corsican threat had been completely eradicated, their financial networks dismantled and quietly absorbed. The treacherous ghost of Marcus Thorne was permanently erased from existence. Only the legitimate business of the underworld remained to be settled. Elena stood near the massive obsidian conference table. She was no longer wearing the midnight black silk gown of a vengeance-seeking queen, nor the degrading polyester uniform of a desperate waitress. She wore an impeccably tailored charcoal gray business suit that radiated sharp professional authority. Her dark hair was pulled back into a sleek, elegant twist, and her eyes held the calm, steady confidence of a woman who had walked through the darkest fires and emerged forged in solid steel. Julian entered the room, his presence instantly commanding the vast space. He wore a dark navy suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and lethal grace. He walked directly to Elena, pausing just close enough for her to catch the familiar sharp scent of bergamot. He did not ask if she was ready. He already knew she was. The heavy mahogany doors opened and Dmitry Volkov walked in, flanked by his most trusted lieutenants. The 50-year-old Russian oligarch looked exactly as terrifying as he had on that fateful night at the Obsidian Room. His cold, calculating gaze immediately swept the room, pausing briefly on the vacant chair where the traitorous Silas Reed had once sat. Then his pale eyes locked onto Elena. He recognized the striking woman who had whispered the devastating truth into Julian's ear, but he also recognized the profound shift in her aura. She was no longer a trembling civilian or collateral damage waiting to happen. She belonged at the apex of power. "Please take a seat, Dmitry," Julian offered, his voice carrying a calm, undisputed authority. "We have a contract to finalize. The correct contract this time." Volkov gave a slow, rigid nod and took his place across the polished obsidian table. Julian placed the newly drafted documents between them. He looked at Elena, giving her a single silent nod to begin. Elena stepped forward, seamlessly bridging the linguistic divide between the two ruthless empires. She began to speak in flawless, authoritative Russian. Her pronunciation was impeccable, carrying the precise, heavy cadence of a native Moscow aristocrat. She did not merely translate Julian's words. She translated his immense power, his unwavering boundaries, and his absolute demand for mutual respect. She walked them through the complex territorial agreements outlining the strict borders of the new weapon smuggling routes. She deliberately lingered on the financial clauses, ensuring every single detail was crystal clear, leaving absolutely zero room for manipulation. The profit distribution will remain exactly as originally discussed, Elena stated, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. A 50-50 split with zero hidden margins. Furthermore, in the event of a territorial dispute, all grievances will be handled by a neutral third-party international arbiter. There will be no unilateral jurisdiction. Dmitri listened to her with intense, silent fascination. In the brutal, hyper-masculine world of the Bratva, women were rarely allowed inside the negotiation room, let alone permitted to dictate the complex terms of a multi-million-dollar syndicate treaty. Yet he found himself completely captivated by her sharp intellect and her absolute refusal to soften the hard edges of the lethal business. She did not omit a single harsh reality, nor did she inject unnecessary pleasantries. She delivered the unvarnished truth like a perfectly aimed bullet. When Elena finished reciting the final liability clause, a profound, heavy silence filled the glass boardroom. Volkov looked down at the pristine documents and then looked up at Julian. "Your previous translator was a miserable, greedy fool," Volkov stated, his deep voice echoing in the large room. "But this woman Moretti, she is a flawless instrument of absolute clarity. We have an agreement." The Russian boss reached inside his tailored jacket, withdrew a heavy gold fountain pen, and signed his name with a violent, sweeping flourish. Julian leaned forward and signed his own name, cementing the massive, lucrative alliance. The lieutenants from both sides visibly relaxed, the suffocating tension finally breaking. Volkov stood up, buttoning his jacket. He did not immediately walk toward the exit. Instead, the ruthless Bratva kingpin walked directly around the large obsidian table and stopped right in front of Elena. Julian shifted slightly, his muscles tensing in an automatic protective instinct, but Elena held her ground perfectly still. Volkov reached out and gently took Elena's right hand. He bowed his head slightly, a rare, profound gesture of traditional Russian aristocratic respect, and pressed a brief, dry kiss against her knuckles. He looked up, meeting her steady, unblinking gaze. "You are a woman of terrifying intellect," Elena. Volkov rumbled, his accent thick and deeply respectful. "Men build massive armies and buy thousands of guns to protect their fragile empires. But Julian Moretti is a very wise man. He knows that his most dangerous weapon is the one standing right here, translating his will into absolute law." Volkov released her hand, gave Julian a final respectful nod, and swept out of the boardroom with his men trailing closely behind him. The heavy doors clicked shut, leaving Julian and Elena entirely alone in the sunlight. Julian looked at the signed contract and then looked at the brilliant woman who had secured his empire. A slow, dark, incredibly proud smile curved his lips, completely softening the harsh lines of his ruthless face. She had not just translated a contract. She had effortlessly conquered the kings of the underworld. The aftermath of the successful negotiation felt like a strange, serene awakening. The brutal machinery of the criminal underworld had been silenced by the sheer force of truth. Julian stood near the massive window of his penthouse office, his back turned toward the city, as he looked down at the sprawling grid of lights. On his mahogany desk sat a thick manila envelope and a set of crisp documents. Julian turned around, his gaze softening as he saw Elena standing near the door. He walked toward her and placed the envelope into her hands. "Everything you lost has been completely restored," Julian stated, his voice low and firm. "Your mother has been transferred to the finest private hospital in the state, with every single medical expense fully covered for the next 10 years. Your professional licenses have been reactivated through my private legal team, and your debt has been erased from every single ledger in the country. You are free, Elena. You can walk out of these doors today and return to the legitimate world of corporate translation if that is what you truly desire. The Moretti name will never be associated with your future unless you choose for it to be." Elena looked at the envelope, feeling the weight of a life reclaimed. She thought of her mother safe and finally free from the agonizing shadow of poverty. She thought of the cold, dark days in the obsidian room when she had believed the world was an irredeemable place. Then she looked at the man who had seen her value when everyone else had discarded her. She realized that she did not belong in the sterile, hollow offices of a world that had betrayed her the moment she became inconvenient. Her place was here at the side of the man who had taught her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision that something mattered more than the fear. She placed the envelope back onto the desk and walked toward the balcony. She reached out and took Julian's hand. "I am not going anywhere," Elena whispered. "I did not spend my entire life building bridges only to stop now when I have finally found someone worth building a future with." Julian squeezed her hand, his expression one of quiet, profound relief. Together they stood on the edge of the world, looking out at the city that had once tried to break them. They were no longer victims of their circumstances, they were the architects of their own destiny. This story teaches us that true power is never found in physical strength or stolen wealth, but in the integrity of our own voices. Sometimes life forces us into the shadows, making us believe we are invisible or broken. Yet, it is often in those very moments of despair that we discover our greatest strengths. We learn that no matter how hard the world tries to stain our reputation, our character remains ours to command. Every challenge we face is an opportunity to translate our pain into purpose and to bridge the gaps between who we were forced to be and who we are truly meant to become. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that it is never too late to reclaim their life and stand in their own truth. We want to hear from you. How did this story make you feel, and how does it relate to the struggles you have faced in your own life? Please share your thoughts in the comments section, because we genuinely cherish every single story from the depths of your hearts. We wish everyone watching this video a life filled with excellent health, daily joy, and absolute peace. May your path always be clear and your bridges always lead to something beautiful. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next video.